Mr. Chairman, Governor, Madam Mayor. Mr. Chairman, it was worth coming to Charlotte just to hear that splendid introduction. Maybe you should run for president when the time comes. I am indeed very grateful indeed. I'm also very honored that the governor is here. I think he's here really because we're fellow chemists. I took a degree and did research, so did he, and we chemists get into very strange places. It's a very, very good training for anyone who wants to go into politics. It teaches you all the chemistry of life, and that's a very valuable thing to know. Now, can I say how glad I am to be here? You've given me a terrific welcome. I think it is probably because we believe passionately in the same things, and we translate our beliefs into practice. And that has always been what has actuated me during my life. And I learned it very much from being brought up in a very much smaller town than this by a father who believed very firmly in Christian principles and handed them on to me, and we've tried to put them into practice. Now, you have given me a rather large agenda of subjects about which you'd like me to speak. I will try and say something about each and leave the rest to your questions. But I think what dominates politics at the moment is the EastWest, what is going to happen in the Soviet Union. We recognize the remarkable things that have been done in the last 6 to 7 years. It was nearly 7 years ago that I had looked very carefully at the Soviet Union and said to my fellow cabinet ministers and foreign secretary, let's have a look at the next generation of Soviet leaders. We might be able to influence them in the ways of freedom and the rule of law. Let's get over that young man called Mr. Gorbachev. And so we invited him to Britain, and he came. He was not then Secretary General of the Communist Party, but he was climbing the ladder fast. We were the first non-communist country he had ever visited. And of course, his eyes were opened. Gone was the propaganda. And he saw that we lived in a free market in a land of plenty. And he saw the spirit that was Britain. And he had a very good welcome. And I saw immediately that he was quite a different person from any other Soviet leader I had ever met. I had met several. I had visited the country. I had entertained many in number 10 Downing Street. Always the process had been the same. We would start off with formal introductions, asking formal questions. One would try to get down to the real issues of the day and start to talk about them, and ask what really things were like and what they were doing. But always you would get a written answer. You would ask a question, they would look at their brief and read out an answer. May not have been the answer to the question, that didn't matter. That was what the brief said. So you'd cross-examine again. I'm also a lawyer, so I know a bit about cross-examination. And you'd cross-examine again, and you'd still get the standard answer. Now, Mr. Gorbachev wasn't like that. It was a fairly critical time when he came to see me. Critical because President Reagan had very wisely agreed to go ahead with SDI. I say very wisely because I had known for some time that the Soviet Union had been very good at some of the special advanced physics of lasers and getting the beams rather further than anyone else, and I was very relieved when the President agreed to go ahead with SDI, because I knew it would put us in the forefront of advanced technology. And we in the West must never be behind in technology. Had we been behind in technology in World War II, Hitler might have won. And so I've always thought we must be ahead. President Reagan had decided to do this. I was thoroughly behind it. And I had a pretty shrewd suspicion that Mr. Gorbachev would come and say, now, look, will you please try to persuade President Reagan not to go ahead with SDI? And that would be because that decision was, in fact, the last straw to the communist government. It was the thing which, following the stationing of cruise and Pershing missiles, SDI was the last straw, because it was the thing which indicated to them that they would never, but never win militarily, because we would always be ahead of them. They knew that. And so I forestalled him and said, Mr. Gorbachev, there's no point in trying ever to divide me from the United States. I am not a mediator. I am not a mediator between the United States and the Soviet Union. I am the loyalist, staunchest member of the Anglo-American alliance, which has done more for liberty than any other alliance throughout history or the world over. So please don't try to persuade me to ask President Reagan to come off that. I believe in the same things, but I believe that he and you and I, our politicians, he's a bit younger than me, but he remembers the last war, our politicians, the last generation of politicians, no, it's very serious, the last generation of politicians who will actually remember the last World War, have some remembrances from it, its terrors, its horrors, its fears, its devastation. And I reckon that our generation has a duty so to bear ourselves and arrange things we never have another war like that again. I went on. I believe passionately in freedom under a rule of law. Freedom is the only thing which brings dignity and prosperity to mankind. Freedom is based on human rights, which are God-given and not state-given, and no state should alienate those rights. No state has the right to take away those fundamental human rights of man. And we will defend that belief so long as we have to. And we will always defend it. You, I went on, believe in communism. I dislike the creed intensely. It, in fact, subordinates the sanctity of human nature to the economics and the diktat of the state. I dislike it. I will fight it forever. President Reagan and I will fight the battle of ideas until we've won, and we shall. But in the meantime, you have as much right to defend your way of life as we have to defend ours. But both of us do not want conflict, and therefore it would be better if we came to a working relationship under which we can defend ourselves at a lesser level of weaponry. To his eternal credit, he took all of this. We went on to talk about agriculture in the Soviet Union. He told me that in the Soviet Union, 30% of the harvest never got to market. And that was their problem. It got to the black market. We discussed these things and went on. He came at 12, He was due back in the Soviet embassy at 5 o'clock. At 6 o'clock in the evening, we were still there discussing. Now, this was remarkable. There was no bunch of papers typewritten with standard answers. He was the first Soviet citizen who I had ever been able to have an in-depth discussion getting to grips with the real points. And I realized straight away as I talked to him, and I talked to him about letting a Soviet jury out, and I talked to him about freedom of religion, of which there was none at that time in the Soviet Union. And all of these things we could discuss, and he had obviously thought about what he was going to say, because just as I had been briefed about what he was like, I expect he had been briefed about what I was like. And therefore, we were able to have a very candid discussion. That is how it all started. Later, as you know, he became Secretary General and then President of the Soviet Union. But I knew full well we had got someone totally different here. You know a good deal of the rest. Had President Reagan and I come and addressed a meeting such as this, when I was elected in 1979 and President Reagan in 80, taking office in 81, and had we, say, jointly been on this platform and said to you, elect us, and we believe that within 10 years, communism will have crumbled in the Soviet Union, they will have freedom of speech, they will have freedom of worship, they will be able to leave the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Defense Pact will have collapsed. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria will be free of the Soviet Union. The revolutionary movements the world over, which the communists had supported because they believed in getting international communism, they will have withdrawn support. There will have been a free election in Nicaragua. There will have been a free election in Namibia. There will be a settlement in Angola. Someone will have told the ANC in South Africa not to pursue their ends by violence but by negotiation, and that apartheid will have crumbled in South Africa. Had we come to you with that forecast, with that policy, you would have thought we lived in cloud cuckoo land. But it has happened. Every single one of those things has happened. President Reagan and I believed the same things. We believed passionately in a strong defense, and we were going to be the strongest in the world. And we were, and our defenses were rebuilt, and so were those of the United States. We weren't going to be intimidated by the Soviet Union, so we stationed the missiles and had the latest technology. And we fought the battle of ideas about the sanctity of the human nature and about the free enterprise economy and private property and so on. And we never gave in. And when President Gorbachev came to power, he realized, and gradually as the news penetrated to the Soviet Union, because they can't keep it out by radio and television, news travels fast, the people there realized the gap between the propaganda and the reality. But I must say I hand it also to President Gorbachev. He had the vision to realize. He didn't need to. He could have gone on as others had gone on. But he had the courage and vision to do remarkable things. And so it came about, as most advances in the world come about, because Providence works by placing people in the position in which they are able to bring about things which had eluded others. What now? What now? I thought 3 or 4 months ago that there was a danger that President Gorbachev had once again come under the influence of the hard-line communists, who for some reason which eludes me are called conservatives in the Soviet Union. When I was there just recently 3 weeks ago, speaking to the young people in Moscow and Leningrad, I had to point out there were conservatives in Britain were people who conserved all the best values and traditions of the past, constantly applying those values to new situations, and therefore constantly making progress and improving things, whether it be in both economics or politics or in the things which affect human nature and the traditional values which transcend the vagaries of time. It is enormously difficult to change a whole people who for 70 years have been instructed that they do nothing unless told, and that they suffered if they did, to start to change their attitude to having initiative, taking responsibility for their decisions, and in fact becoming much more a free market economy. Moreover, if you talk to them about a free market economy, they think you're talking about the black market. And so you have to be very careful and point out that there is no place for a black market in the West, because a black market flourishes in shortages and the West produces plenty, so there's no black market in the West. It is a colossal change to bring about in the Soviet Union when they have been made passive and servile through 70 years of communism. And the difficulties were manifest, and it was going slowly, and I feared that the hardliners would have taken control again. In fact, they have not. And I was there 3 weeks ago and saw Mr. Gorbachev, and in fact, the dispersal of powers from the center to the individual republics is going to go ahead. You've probably seen today, they haven't got all the details, but it is the first stage to getting rid of central control, get the powers out to the republics, and then get in a law about private property, and then bring about a market economy. But there's only been the diktat of the Communist Party, carried out by communist judges. They don't know what a rule of law is like. They don't know what it's like to enforce a contract. They don't know what it's like to go and have somewhere to complain. They don't know what it's like to have a government subject to the rule of law just as much as a citizen is. The change of attitude required is enormous. But I know, and I'm absolutely convinced now, that it will come about. There were 3 elections on June the 12th in the Soviet Union. One for Mr. Yeltsin, who is a real reformer. Do not underestimate him. I spotted him about 18 months ago and told President Bush, when I met him in Bermuda at the Easter of the year, that I thought that Mr. Yeltsin was a real full reformer. And I just hoped that he and Mr. Gorbachev would join together. So I was delighted when Mr. Yeltsin won the presidency of Russia, which of the republics is quite the biggest, 11 time zones, and alone would be the largest country in the world. He's a reformer, and he's determined. The other interesting election there was of Mr. Popov, the mayor of Moscow. When I first met him 18 months ago, he spent his time telling me what a marvelous man Milton Friedman was, and he'd like to introduce, yes, and he'd like to introduce his economic policies in Moscow and get private property and sell some of the houses. Now there again, yes, you laugh. That man is rather brilliant, a genius, and very determined. That's Popov. Milton Friedman's also a genius, very determined. But now he has been elected. And there's a third one, a Mr. Sobchak in Leningrad, a full free market man, a passionate believer in human rights, the rule of law, and private property, determined to bring it in. All 3 elected that day. And I knew there was a 4th question being put that day. It was interesting when I was there. Various people were saying, oh no, they will not change the name from Leningrad to St. Petersburg because they remember the siege of Leningrad in wartime. And then some of the people from outside Leningrad said, well, when we go into the city, we still say we're going to Peter. We don't say we're going to Leningrad. They've actually voted to change it back to St. Petersburg to get rid of the Lenin image. Now, this is very, very, very good news. And I started off in the way I did by saying to you, look at the remarkable things that have happened. Had we thought in 1979 we could bring that about, we would have paid almost anything for it. Provided they get those reforms underway, they need a helping hand with the law, with contract law, with how to set up their banks, with how to bring in management, with how to run free enterprise. Not a lot from the United States or from Europe, but a small amount that is crucial. Because once they've got that confidence of the West that these things are going to come about, there'll be a great deal of free enterprise that goes over there and helps to bring it about. Now, that is East-West relations. Our object is to get democracy right from the borders with Western Europe right across to the Pacific. And we have a very good chance. It is a historic chance. This has been a remarkable century. The Soviet Union took a wrong turn. Russia took a wrong turn in history. Went down one of the blind alleys in history. When after the serfs were enfranchised by the Tsar, Lenin snuffed all that out and for 70 years went back into the Dark Ages with the communism which has now collapsed. It came and went in the century. We have a historic opportunity to extend democracy, to bring them freedom, and to bring a rule of law, and we must not fail them. Now, may I turn to some other things? I will not be too long. But that's the most interesting, the most historic one. May I turn quickly to the Middle East? It so happened, and it's again the way things work, that I had agreed to come to a conference in Aspen in August. I don't normally do these things in August because Parliament's up and one wants just a little bit of time off. But I heard that they were planning to have President Bush open the Aspen conference and me to close it. So I said, yes, if President Bush will go, I certainly will go. I arrived in Aspen, and at 1 o'clock in the morning, I got a telephone call that Iraq had gone into Kuwait. We moved immediately, sent a signal immediately to our naval ships that were coming back from Hong Kong, not to come straight back to Britain, but to go to the Gulf to join the Armilla Patrol, which we've kept there since 1980. And then I saw President Bush in later that morning, before he spoke, and we had a very direct discussion and decided that there's only one thing to do with dictators who try to take other people's land, and that's to stop them there and then. And decided that if he didn't get out within a matter of hours, we had the United Nations motion, if he didn't get out within a matter of hours, that we would have to send troops. I saw him again on the Monday in Washington. Saddam Hussein had not got out, and the rest you know. It was an example of decisive action on a point of principle. And if you compromise on that, you are lost. Now Saddam Hussein is still there. There will be no trust of Iraq until he's gone. That is why we're keeping tough sanctions on and monitoring very carefully what happens in there. There's also the matter of the wider Middle East. That whole war has changed many perceptions because missiles are no respecters of borders. And therefore, each country is having to do a reassessment of its strategy. Both George Shultz and Jim Baker were making strenuous efforts to resolve the Arab-Israel problem. I just want to say this to you. It's one of the most complicated problems in the world. That land in the Middle East, east of the Mediterranean, from Turkey, Iran, Iraq, right round to the Israel, Palestine, coming round to Egypt, Syria, Jordan. That land has been fought over more than any other land in history. The reason you know, it is the place of the three great monotheistic religions. Judaism, the Old Testament, the land of the Old Testament, the land of the New Testament, Christianity, the land of Islam. These three religions, I regret, have given rise to enormous battles through the ages. The Crusades, the French Crusade and the British Crusade to those lands. Enormous other battles, the Ottoman Empire, and eventually Jerusalem was taken by the Western forces, by General Allenby in 1918, and we came into the mandate for Palestine. The sensitivities, the emotions, the resentments, the hatreds, the animosities are legion. It will not be solved quickly, but we just have steadily to persevere. Because I think what the Gulf War has done has shown there can be no solution from war. Whatever the differences, and they are many, whatever the differences, they all have an interest in common. It is that they get a settlement which will give everyone something and no one everything that they want. Those take a long time to negotiate, but that is what we must do, and we must persist until we get through to a settlement. Otherwise, we shall get local problems occurring again and again. Now, there were one or two other things which you asked me quickly to speak about. I was asked if I had any views or if I would say something on the future of Europe. Of course I have views. Always have had, always will. The European community started because we never wanted to see battle in Europe again between the nations of Europe. The question is, how does it continue? I have a very strong view of the way in which it should continue. There are 12 sovereign nations, part of the economic community, each with its different language, each with its different history, each with its different culture, each with its different economy. We joined because we wanted one market so that we would have the same kind of size market as you have. But it was an economic thing for freer trade within the market, not to build a barrier round the common market, but to get freer trade within as an example to the world that we may enlarge freer trade without. It was never meant to try to take the sovereignty of the 12 nations and to build a big central state from 12 different peoples with different ideas. We shall do best in Europe if we continue to cooperate as 12 sovereign states, voluntarily sitting down together to see how we can go forward in agreement. If in fact you try to suppress their nationality, it will be very damaging. It will cause resentments, and in the end it will fly apart. It is the height of folly to try at the same time as the Soviet Union is separating out the republics and Eastern Europe, and they're recovering their national identity, and they're dispersing the powers from the center. It is the height of folly for West Europe to be concentrating powers at the center, not accountable to any parliament of any kind with any powers at all, That Parliament is only a talking shop. The height of folly to concentrate powers at the centre and try to suppress nationality. Just let me say to you this. Just supposing we'd had some kind of central control and we'd had to go to that central control to get a majority vote when President Bush said, now what are we going to do? Are we going to send forces to the Gulf? First, there had been a lot of argy-bargy and argument. Second, there could have been a majority vote. And thirdly, you don't know what decision they would have come to. Probably the one they did. Not very much. We were free. We weren't constrained by that. And so, there was someone to stand with the United States in defense of freedom. That is the system that we should continue. 12 sovereign states. That is the way we will get further, and that is the way we will get freer trade and greater cooperation. I do sometimes say to my colleagues, look, at the time it was quite good to get Europe together, but now just enlarge your ideas. We are in a smaller world. You do not want a big barrier around Europe. We want to enlarge our ideas to a much wider world, especially now the European countries are free. We want to take them in to keep democracy there. We want to get freer trade over the whole world. And we want, in fact, to have the wider world order, each with sovereign nations negotiating. Now, I hope I have made that one clear. Can I just say, I see some of you looking at your watches. I just want to make one more point before I'm open to questions. South Africa. Just as there are great things going on in the Soviet Union, there are great things going on in South Africa. I thought it absolutely wrong to put sanctions on South Africa. You help no one if you ruin their economy. While people talked about sanctions, what they meant was throwing people out of work, and what they meant was poverty and starvation among the families of those people who relied upon their work for their existence. So I managed to stop sanctions going on in South Africa from the Commonwealth, and Chancellor Cole and I stopped them from Europe. And thank goodness we did, because that economy is still strong. What has happened in South Africa is what happens in other countries from time to time. You get an occasion, a period, when you can achieve, when what is morally right becomes practically possible. That thing happened when President de Klerk became president. Today, the whole laws of apartheid have gone. They have been disbanded. And all sanctions from those who put them on should come off, because there's no longer apartheid. What is now important is to get negotiations going. President de Klerk is ready. I was there just before I went to the Soviet Union. The difficulty is that the ANC is not yet ready. It's fraught between those who want to negotiate and those who are not yet ready to do so and still talk about armed struggle and about nationalization. But that too will come right. It has been a remarkable period of hope in the last 10 years, and we now have to make certain that we go forward to achieve the things which we're on the verge of achieving, and we must not falter. And the single greatest force in the world for liberty, for human rights, for the sanctity and the dignity of man has been and must remain the Anglo-American alliance. That is my message.